Siyat Lishmaya is going to be one of the main discussions in Mitzvah Hashem on Bolok, about how the Brochos and the Klolos work in Mitzvah Hashem. First of all, there's one point that we forgot to mention. We said that there was so you have to listen to everything and you don't have to listen to anything. How do you listen to the second piece? We spoke about Shliach Shel Adam Kamoisei, that Bolok said to Biloms that I want you to curse them, and the curse will be I will receive the curse. What do you mean I will receive the curse? Because whoever curses Klal Yisrael themselves is subject to a curse. And says Bolok, Biloms, don't be scared to curse them. Why? I'm going to be l'cha'onor, curse for me, meaning literally curse me, says Bolok. I'm going to be the one that's going to receive the curse. And we said, what's going on? Maybe, on the contrary, Biloms is not really a shliach, a representative, a designated representative of Bolok, because Bolok is not entitled to designate Biloms as his representative, because when it's coming to something that is inappropriate, there's a higher authority, there's a higher authority that has designated this as improper conduct. You're not entitled, you're not authorized to instruct someone else to act, and if they choose to act, that's their own free choice, and they're representing themselves. Biloms and cursing Klal Yisrael is representing themselves, perhaps. We discussed this. And we said maybe this is what Bolok is saying. Bolok was coming to say, no, there is a concept here of representation, of you being my messenger and representative, because it is not being designated min hashamayim. Hashem has not required the world to respect Yisrael. This world is given over to the nations of the world. Yisrael is an anomaly in this world, a spiritual anomaly. Therefore, the shlichus will be effective. That's the cha'onor ali. That's the message you're saying to Biloms. Do not be scared, because my authority enables the curse here to be effective, to be, at least there is permission. You have permission in this world to effect it. We said, l'cha'onor ali, eisa omazeh. So you could say, orali eisa omazeh. Shliach shel ein shliach lidvar aveira. Yeah, that's the term that's used. Ein shliach lidvar aveira. That was what Biloms might be concerned about. Ein shliach lidvar aveira is, if you take the Rosh Oisios, it's 401 Aleph Tov. U'lecha onorali eis ha'omazeh. Biloms says, lecha onorali, curse them for me. Because you can be a valid shliach, you can be my representative, it's permissible. So maybe the Torah answers, no, ein shliach l'dvar aveira eis ha'omazeh. You're not entitled to, you've got no permission. Or maybe the contrary, you could learn also this is Biloms' response. Klal Yisrael, you may not curse, but es ha'omazeh, this people may be referring to the Erev Rav, maybe that is a way in. Es, even on the more peripheral level, maybe you are entitled to curse them. And that's how you can get in and be my representative. Anyway, coming back now to the actual the dynamics of this parsha, of this curses. What happens? Bolok says to Biloms, come here, and he shows the parts of the people that he should have sympathy on them. Takes them to Bama, and he sees them, the people, and these are regular people going away about their business. Surely you, Biloms, want to have mercy on these people, these potential victims of Am Yisrael. So Biloms instructs Bolok, says, build a mizbeach, 7 mizbochis, 7 altars, and offer up on each of them a par and an aisle. 7 par, 7 aisle. And what's the idea of this? So Chazal tells this was, so to speak, a spiritual counterbalance to the altars that the Avos HaKadoshim had offered. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov themselves all built a number of altars and offered sacrifices to Hashem. And Bilam was trying to build a counter altar to that. We have to know, what does that mean? What is this counter altar? Let's make a note. This counter Mizbeach. Sorry about the writing. What was the idea of it? And then what does he do? Bolok does as instructed. He offers up this parva el b'mizbeach. And then Bilam says to Bolok, Hisyatsev al oilosecho. Your oilo. This is yours. Bilam doesn't say it's mine. Bilam instructs Bolok to do it. He says, Hisyatsev al oilosecho. And what's this? Hisyatsev, stand there. Why is the instruction to stand there on his altar where he has offered these sacrifices? And Bilam says, I will go and maybe, I'll see, maybe Hashem will meet me. Yikore Hashem, Yikrosi Hashem will meet me. He comes to meet me and he will show me and so he goes quietly, he does his routine. Das Kenim says, what's Yikore? Why does Hashem come to meet Bilam? When it comes to Klal Yisrael, Moshe Rabbeinu, Vayikra Moshe, he comes and has to invite Moshe in. When it comes to Bilam, he comes out to meet Bilam. Does this show the great enthusiasm Hashem has, so to speak, for engaging with Bilam prophetically? So Das Kenim says very nicely on the opposite, on the contrary, it's actually showing the opposite. A moshel too, a king had two servants, one who was dear to him, and one who was actually, who found extremely offensive, odious, and unpleasant to have in his vicinity. So the one from whom he enjoyed his company, so he invited, come into the palace, come and see me here. The one whose company he actually despised, when he knew, nevertheless, he was an officer, he had authority in the kingdom, in the palace. So he said, whenever he comes, tell me. I don't want him coming in and stinking out this place. I will go out to meet him. Anything but he should not come in here. He should not enter the divine chamber. And Bilam tells Bolok, Hisyatsev, stand here, al oilosecho. Sort of looking after your sacrifices, your korbonos. The point, I just can't remember now what it was. Yeah. I have to say this, otherwise I forget it. And it's relevant to this. We'll write it down. The whole time Bolok says to Bilam, Ulechona orally. Lechona orally. The whole time Lecho. Lechona orally. That's what Bolok says to Bilam. Lechona. And Bilam responds ultimately, Haloi, Bilam says to Bolok says to Bilam, I sent you to come. Sholech sholachti ilecho. Why did you not come? Why did you not go to me? And Bilam says, Hine bosi. He doesn't say olachti. Hine bosi. I've come to you. Bolok says, go to me. And Bolok says, I've come to you. And it seems to be this is an important... I've come to you and I cannot say anything. So what's it saying? And also, I want to talk about the first set of Brochos. So lead us into this first set of Brochos. Bilam goes and he meets Hashem and he says to him, I offered up these 7 altars and I've offered up parva ayil, oxen and goats, Bamizbeach, on the altar. So Hashem gives Bilam word what to say. Places in his mouth words. You got the word of the goy and how exactly he did it. He says, this is what you have to say. V'choy sedabe. Choy is precisely, you cannot in any way change from the chosen text. So he tells him, and Bilam is waiting, he comes back. V'nei nitzov al oilo. So he's standing there. Yeah, he's still standing by his oilo. V'nei nitzov al oilo soy. And also Rimoy over there. What's the significance of this? He's standing by his altar. So what? And Bilam now says his set piece that he's been instructed to do by Hashem. We're going to look at it, the first set of Brochos. A little bit of detail. He says, Min Aram, that's where we originated from. Sorry, that's where I am, says Bolok. Bolok calls me, Mihari Kedem, and he tells me, curse to me, to expressions of curse or invoking divine anger against Klal Yisrael. And Bilam expresses in frustration, what possible curse am I able to impose upon Klal Yisrael? Hashem has not cursed them. What possible curse can I bring Hashem? What possible anger can I invoke? There's no divine anger with Klal Yisrael. So what can I do? We have to understand why. And we're told, and we'll maybe talk about the Das Kenim, that essentially the Gemara tells us that Bilam does not really have the power to invoke a curse, maybe upon anyone, certainly not upon Klal Yisrael. But there is one moment during the day when Hashem, Kel Zoyim B'chol Yoim, Hashem expresses his anger once a day, and that perhaps because he's annoyed even with Klal Yisrael, the way they're conducting themselves. And Bilam was able to divine that unique moment. He looked at perhaps the way that the animals, I think it was the rooster, became red at that time, and that was for him the sign that Hashem is angry, and he would use that time, that moment, to curse Am Yisrael. But nevertheless, Hashem, in His great mercy, during this whole period, Hashem said, Lo Zoam. And Hashem did not Lo Zoam Hashem. Hashem did not express any anger during that time. That was a great chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. That even that instant of anger did not express itself. Was not apparent. And why is that? What's happening? How can Hashem do that? How does Hashem sort of define if there is essentially an anger that represents that there is something of a kichuk, there is something of an accusation, a reasonable, a possible accusation leveled against the conduct of Klal Yisrael that invokes this divine anger. So why does Hashem suddenly hide it? What happened to it? Klal Yisrael suddenly became perfect. They're not perfect. We're going to see there's many occasions where Klal Yisrael have invoked great anger and wrath against them. He actually wanted to annihilate them were it not for the prayers and intervention of Moshe Rabbeinu. So why is Bilam, and Bilam seeks to manipulate this, so why is he unable to? How is it Hashem is able to hide it? And he goes further, he carries on. He expresses, I'm not able, Hashem did not get angry. Kimi Roish, and he sort of he perhaps explains it. Kimi Roish Tsuri Maranu Mikvois Ashurano. From the heights, the high rocks, and from the hills, I see Klal Yisrael. Referring, going to most Meforshim and the Midrash, this verse to the Ovois. I look at the roots of Klal Yisrael, and they are extremely firm. It seems, therefore, since we have the tzaddikim, the forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, who themselves were perfect in their service of Hashem, there was no spiritual chink in their armor. Therefore, essentially, there was no room to attack Klal Yisrael. However, one could say, but look at the way Klal Yisrael conduct themselves. They are not perhaps really representing the Ovois. They're not truly going in the path of the Ovois. Maybe on the contrary, the Ovois were themselves complete, perfect tzaddikim. But Klal Yisrael have not followed their path. So maybe there is room for this curse to take effect in some ways. It carries on, no. Hashem views them, looks at from the perspective of the Ovis. And these people dwell alone. And they have no, whatever they're not, there's many ways of translating it. They will not, Rashi brings, they will not be destroyed with the goyim. When the nations of the world will themselves ultimately cease, Klal Yisrael will survive. Will ultimately survive and thrive in that final epoch. And they will not cease when everyone else does. They will inherit the world. Klal Yisrael will inherit the world, and they do not follow he says, they do not go to the minhagim. Do not follow the culture. They're not influenced. They do not adopt foreign culture. They stick to a Torah culture. And if we do, that's inappropriate. And Bilam says, then he goes even further. Mi moda afar Yaakov misparis roiva Yisrael. So there are many explanations to this. All the mitzvahs that they perform with offer, with dust. Mi moda afar Yaakov misparis roiva Yisrael. However, most Meforshim say this refers, interestingly, unusually perhaps one might say, to the Klal Yisrael when they are procreating. And Bilam views this and says this is viewed, perhaps he's seeking to find something impure. Within that process, Klal Yisrael, they also procreate like other creatures, so maybe there is an element of animalistic tendencies to be found even within Yisrael. And he says no. The time when Yisrael, the multiple occasions when Yisrael procreate, on the contrary, this is dear to Hashem. Why? First of all, they do many mitzvahs, and also Hashem is waiting for the divine drop that will herald the coming of Mashiach. And they will become multiple. Targum Yerushalmi brings. They will become multiple. Mimana. There are so many of them. Mispas Roiva. Roiva refers to Revere, to actually mating. But this results in Klal Yisrael becoming a mass multitude. And within that, the spark of Mashiach lies. Let's see, did the Targum Yerushalmi right? That's the Das the Kenyan brings. Right, and ultimately, how does Bilam finish off? Tamois nafshi mois yishorim usiach risi kamoyu. He says something enigmatic. Bilam says he knows he's going to die. I'm going to die, says Bilam. If I want to tell you I'm going to create a sign, an omen, which will determine, from which you can determine the way I am going to, my end is going to be. If I will die a natural death, says Bilam, then perhaps I can be in a ben Adam Abo. I will merit the world to come. If, however, my downfall is through the sword, then ultimately I am doomed and I will have no share in the world to come. If I die in normal, regular, like upright people, such a death, then I perhaps will inherit the world to come. If, however, my downfall comes through the sword, as it ultimately did at the hands of Pinchas, then I will not share the world to come with Yisrael. And what is this saying? What is all this? This is one monologue. This is the first tract, the first set of blessings that Bilam brought to Klal Yisrael. What are they saying? So let's go back to the beginning. First of all, we said Esa'om. The Korbonos. Let's talk a little bit about perhaps the idea of the Korbonos. And this is all following, I think, this theme. That essentially, to whom does the world belong? Does the world belong to the nations of the world, and they're entitled to act as they would wish, and they're not considered perhaps acting inappropriately? They're going about their own thing, as long as they're not violent, they're not attacking. They are essentially within their rights, within their free choice of rights. Or no, essentially, does the world belong to Yisrael? And is there fundamentally an expectation that we should be serving Hashem the way Klal Yisrael have been instructed? Or again, is Klal Yisrael an anomaly that is outside the consensus? The moral, spiritual consensus. And this is what Bilam is trying to say. Therefore, for Yisrael, if they start to overimpose themselves, we are entitled to seek to diminish them. And that's how he even has the audacity, Bilam, to counter Hashem about this people who came out from Mitzrayim. Hashem is the one that brought them out from Mitzrayim. And Bilam views this, no, this is a small phenomenon, a localized phenomenon, that maybe Hashem did help them and sort of somehow transpired that they exited Mitzrayim, they received the Torah, but this is an anomaly. This does not fundamentally define the way Hashem even runs the world. The world was given over for the nations of the world. Therefore, I'm entitled to seek even divine assistance in severely limiting Klal Yisrael, their sphere of influence on the world. And he says, build to me these 7 altars. What's going on? Because when the Goyim, when Bolok and Bilam offer sacrifices, they might even be offering the sacrifices to Hashem. But this is with this ulterior motive. They are saying, we are serving Hashem, so to speak, the way the nations serve Hashem. The way the nations serve Hashem is in the way we are accustomed to. We have a good life, we enjoy ourselves in this world, we're not fundamentally focused on serving Hashem. We maybe can pay lip service. Yisrael is therefore our spiritual enemy and is our material enemy. He seeks to deny us, to indulge in the pleasures of this world. And we say, no, our way of this is what Hashem is entitled us, has given us true free choice to enjoy this world. And we serve Hashem. That is the level of service that we're going about our business. That is also a form perhaps of serving Hashem. We acknowledge, thank you Hashem for giving us this beautiful free world to indulge as we would. And they are sort of they're saying, we're entitled to serve Hashem on that basis. And trying to say that these altars, these 7 altars that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov all offered, they are not the primary altars in this world. They are not the primary movers, primary spiritual and cultural force that should really is at the forefront of society, spiritual society. No, we represent what society truly should be. Therefore, says Bilam, this is what you should be offering. Why? Because I know, says Bilam. Now and then what's going to happen? Says Bilam, the dynamic is going to work like this. We're going to offer this. Then I am going to, so to speak, to confront Hashem. I'm going to come close to Hashem. And I know, says Bilam, when I come close to confronting Hashem, when I am in the divine celestial chamber, it's a different world there. Yes, it's a spiritual world. It's a world in which essentially Yisrael is very much venerated. They are viewed as very dear and important to Hashem. And essentially, I will not be able to curse Klal Yisrael from that vantage, from that point of view. Essentially, I will be inspired to bless them. There's no question. Bilam knows that. However, it says Bilam, that is when I'm in this trance, this prophetic trance. That's when I'm in a different world. However, when I return to this world, that's going to be the main question. What happens now when I touch down to earth, spiritual touchdown, I come back. Says Bilam, then that is the time I want to ensure that whatever inspiration I had to venerate Yisrael, that will be sort of completely lost. And how can we assure that? Because you, Bolok, the king, will be hisyatziv al ilosecha. You will have brought your sacrifices, which represent the nation's approach to this world, the nation's entitlement to enjoyment in this world, and you will still be misyatziv, you will still be busy offering these sacrifices, which indicate that you also have entitlement. Hashem has given us our portion in this world, and I will, so to speak, connect up with you. I will come back and connect with you. I want you to bring your influence, this cultural contradiction to the spiritual inspiration that I have experienced on behalf of Yisrael. And I want you to put me back to my place, bring me back to the heathen culture, the hedonist approach to life. He's yatziv and stands firm. Why? Because it's not going to be simple. Because when I am there up with Hashem, being inspired spiritually on behalf of Klal Yisrael, this was going to bring, and I've got my feet on the ground, I'm also partly here. This may even inspire you. You may even somehow, there'll be some inhibition to you offering your sacrifices. Whether it be internal, external, it doesn't matter. In some way you will be inhibited from pursuing your agenda through these sacrifices. So Bilam instructs Bolok, make sure you stand firm in your intransigent defiance of Hashem's spiritual influence in this world. And ultimately this fails. Bilam returns and says to Bolok, no. Hashem says to Bilam, no. Even in this world, Bolok has got no entitlement to inhibit me blessing Yisrael, because as we said, the blessing Hashem's chosen people is not just an anomaly. It's not just perhaps one possibility of many of a variety of possibilities in this world. This is the way the world works. These are the laws of nature. And therefore, there's something that is axiomatic to this world, spiritually axiomatic. And no one has the right to define that. And therefore, Hashem says the blessing of Yisrael in this world is something that no one is entitled to define. And on the contrary, anyone who defies it defies the laws of nature and ultimately defies their own right to existence. And what are the Brochos that he brings? First of all, we said, now we have the question though. Bilam sought to curse out Yisrael. And maybe saying he wants to draw attention to the fact that Yisrael themselves are deserving of being cursed because they themselves act inappropriately, and that the fact that Yisrael themselves fall and sin and are themselves tempted, succumb to temptation of this world, is indicative of this dynamic that the world fundamentally is a world that's given over to materialism. The material pools and allures of this world are the overwhelming force, and this seems to indicate that Hashem has given over the world to the nations of the world, the way they view the world, that they are the cultural, overwhelmingly potent forces that inform everything that mankind, including Yisrael, does. Therefore, Yisrael are unable to maintain this spiritual high indefinitely. Therefore, I'm entitled to curse this pursuit of this spiritual Torah goal. And the Biloms says, but he experiences this phenomenon. No, Hashem has not cursed them. Hashem is not angry with them. They have not fallen. They have not deserving of being cursed. And why not? And he explains. He starts with the Ovis. He's very much focused on the Ovis. This is what I want to talk about. What is it about the Ovis? How is it that the Ovis have such a strong influence here? We're inspired by the Ovis. And I asked, why did Hashem initiate Klal Yisrael? Why did Hashem start with the Ovis, with the single Ovis? Avram, Yisrael, Yaakov, 3 individuals. Why was it not perhaps a holy commune, only band of people who got together to be inspired and to acknowledge Hashem? Why did it have to be Yechidim? So you might say, only Yechidim, it could only be one person, because the world has got such a strong pull, it had to be one unique individual who would see the light. Perhaps, but maybe not, since ultimately this is going to give rise to a whole nation. So maybe the roots of this nation could also be a group of people. So maybe because it had to be this unique tzaddik, someone who is completely perfect. Be perfect in your service of Hashem. That can only be a unique individual. That's why it had to be the Ovis. Yes, perhaps. I'm also going to suggest another aspect to this dynamic. That is because this is Hashem wants to ensure the survival of Yisrael. Hashem wants to ensure that Yisrael benefit from the maximum divine assistance possible. And this can only come through this dynamic. And why? Because if Klal Yisrael, let's say, are a community, fundamentally a community, many people, in which case they're going to act on occasion, they're going to act improperly, in which case they are going to be subject to a potential divine decrees, the punishment. The mazikim are going to come and start attacking and criticizing and endangering, perhaps even existentially, Klal Yisrael are potentially under great danger. And not just that. You might say yes, but Hashem, so to speak, needs His people. Yisrael has to exist, have to thrive. Otherwise, Hashem has got no place in this world. That's why He created this world for Yisrael. So Hashem will not let that happen. But yes, Hashem will not let it happen directly. But once perhaps the Malach Hamoves, the Mashchis, is given permission to start attacking Klal Yisrael, then ultimately perhaps even all the good aspects of Klal Yisrael can get carried away with that. And there is a potential for this existential annihilation even of Yisrael, if they are a group of individuals. If, however, they're one individual, Hashem, so to speak, has to ensure the survival. Avram Yogil, as an individual, Avram is the whole of Klal Yisrael. That is it. There's nothing else. If there's no Avram, then there's no Klal Yisrael. And therefore, so to speak, the divine assistance, therefore Hashem ensured that. That's why it came out that Klal Yisrael was formed from an individual, from Avram Avinu, from one person. Because this one person Hashem has to ensure, so to speak, he has to merit unique divine assistance and protection. Because should anything happen untowards to Avram, then finished. There's no Yisrael, there's no world, there's nothing. And Hashem ensured it like that. But not just that. Hashem came along and promised to Avram, I'm going to make you a great nation, and you're going to be like this, the sand of the seashore, the stars of the sky. And the Ramban tells us, what the fathers do, what happens to the father, that is symbolic of what will happen to the children. And putting that together, I understand this means like this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when Hashem makes a divine promise, it is not just sort of a matter of goodwill, and it creates a hopeful expectation it's going to be fulfilled. It's more than that. A person, yes, he promises something, he says something, it will either be fulfilled or it will not. When Hashem promises something, especially uniquely when Hashem promises to do something, to bestow some benefit, that is something that is a definite, it's a given, it almost becomes a fact. So when Hashem says to Avram, I promise that you will thrive, and Klal Yisrael will emanate for you as a great nation, that is not just a sort of promise, a hope, an expectation. That is a fact. That is an existential, integral part, again, of creation. That is one of the laws of physics of nature now. That Klal Yisrael will become a great multitude. Therefore, their existence on that level is guaranteed. And Hashem, maybe, why did it not just start from Avram? And then it will expand out. You've got Avram, then we'll have Klal Yisrael emanating from that. No. Hashem said again there's going to be another individual. Why? Only one, only Yitzchak. Because Yitzchak again was a tzaddik. And Hashem said, okay, Klal Yisrael again is dependent completely on Yitzchak. There's no one else. Not Yishmael and not Bnei Keturah. It's not going to work. The whole of the existence of Klal Yisrael and of Hashem having a people and of the world existing is dependent only on Yitzchak. And therefore again Hashem is unable, so to speak. Yitzchak merits therefore complete divine protection. Nothing can happen to Yitzchak. And again with Yaakov, nothing can happen to Yaakov again, because Esau is not going to be the one that is going to fulfill the promise of a promised chosen people that are serving Hashem. So it can only be through Yaakov. And therefore that's why we have three Ovos. That's one of the reasons why we have three Ovos as individuals. This dynamic of Hashem ensuring the survival of Am Yisrael happens not just once. Hashem ensures this happens twice, happens 3 times. That creates an even greater, more potent dynamic of ensuring the survival of Am Yisrael, L'Dorei Yisrael. That's A. And also, because Hashem promises, like we said, the survival and the thriving of Klal Yisrael, therefore, so to speak, when you look at Avram, you're actually seeing Klal Yisrael. You don't see it, but since Hashem has promised from Avram, from Yitzchak and from Yaakov will emanate the nation of Israel, therefore, in actual fact, they already exist then within Avram. They actually exist then. That's why Maisa of a similar body. Whatever happens to Avram is a symbolic, is an omen of what will happen to his children. It's not just a symbol or an indication or a hint, because that is actually what's happening. Because we are embodied in Avram. Since Hashem has said we emanate from Avram, we're already there. What's happening to Avram is actually at that same time happening to us. Perhaps we don't see it, we don't perceive it, but it's actually there on that level. And therefore, let's take that even further. So what? So okay, that first of all offers us a great measure of spiritual protection. Nothing can happen to Klal Yisrael. Hashem, so to speak, his hands are almost tied. He cannot allow Klal Yisrael to be cursed and cursed out. Just like this could not happen to Avram, because that will be an existential threat to the people of Hashem. It can never happen. But Hashem also says, "This people dwell by themselves and are not party to the culture of the Goyim, and they're not party to the fate of the Goyim." And Hashem says, and Biloms says, who we said, he looks at the seed where Klal Yisrael are propagating themselves, and he looks there, which is inappropriate, and he says, this is Hashem, so to speak, is counting, looking at the seed of Israel, waiting for Mashiach. And that, he sought to see something improper within Yisrael. And no, he sees something actually spiritually very elevated. And perhaps this is a continuation of this dynamic. Because ultimately there is going to be an epoch where everything in the world is spiritual. When only Klal Yisrael will thrive in that epoch, in that time. Okay. So he said like this. Klal Yisrael went through a period when they were in the Midbar. During that time, these years, those 40 years, let's say, in the Midbar, at that time, they were completely isolated from the world. They were living within the Onon. That was the time when Klal Yisrael were able to fortify themselves spiritually, that nothing in the world will be of any influence to them. They're living in a vacuum, a spiritual vacuum. We've spoken about this a lot, where nothing has any influence whatsoever over them. That would augur well for the fact that when Klal Yisrael do ultimately emerge, they come into Eretz Yisrael, they will also continue, hopefully, with that dynamic. However, who's to say? Maybe not. Maybe who's not to say? This is the argument that is often used against, for example, the sheltered cultural environment to which Klal Yisrael, certain elements of Klal Yisrael, nurture their children. Mea Sha'arim, Boti Hungarim, the Hasidim, the extremists, inverted commas, who do not expose their children to any foreign culture. They have a pure Torah education. And many people, there are many detractors of that, who say, why do you not expose them to technology, to culture, to intellect, to what the world has to offer? And the argument is, first of all, they can use that to enhance the world, and we'll speak about it later. But the argument is also they can have a huge cultural shock. Because at one point they are going to be having to confront this. And if they're not armed with the tools based on familiarity to deal with this, they are actually going to be spiritually compromised, challenged, and perhaps will often fall. As maybe they point to the fact they suggest, those detractors suggest that's what happens. Similarly here, Klal Yisrael in the Midbar for 40 years, yes, they're in the spiritual vacuum. But what that itself surely carries with it this risk. They're going to emerge from that. They're not going to be culturally prepared for immaterial existence, living within the world. How can you say they're levodod? So levodod, they're by themselves, they're isolated. And that's viewed as, so to speak, the guarantor for the spiritual purity of Am Yisrael. Why is that a guarantee? How can that, at the time, yes, we're in the cloud. Great, what happens when they emerge? So, you could say, first of all, Hen'am levodod yishkoin. Levodod is, right here. Yes, it is. No. We can rub this out. We finished with that. We've even finished with Hisiat Seif al Ilosecha. Sorry for taking up time with this. Because we'll say this here. Kil choich hashoyer and in am levodod. Levodod is how many? 32, 40. That is the 40 years in the Midbar, like we said. That's the 40 years when they were completely pure. They were completely removed from the world. And that is hopefully the guarantor that they will continue to act divorced from the foreign culture. And they were worried, Kil choich hashoyer. It's sometimes spelled, I think, with ilachachu. It's also ilachachu. Same letters. Lamed Ches, Kil choich hashoyer, is 38. That's the 38 years that Klal Yisrael spent in spiritual isolation. The extra 38 years that Hashem added on. We've spoken about that. After Shloshim U'Shmeina Shana, it says in Parashat Dvarim. That was the years that Hashem said Klal Yisrael need to spiritually fortify themselves before they emerge into the world. Because it seems from the Meraglim, it was apparent that they're unable to cope. Kil choich is 38, Chovav is 26. That is when they are together with the Shekhinah, directly, without anything intervening between them. That is what spiritually fortifies them. But we're asking why? Maybe they need exposure. So this perhaps is the answer. Because there's going to be, like we said, there's going to be an epoch. It's going to be a Mashiach, a time that will come when the world will be exposed. There will be no impediments, nothing intervening between this physical material world and between the spiritual dimension. We will perceive Hashem, Moleh Ha'oretz De'ez Hashem. There will be no barriers, no spiritual barriers to complete spiritual realization of ourselves. And the nations in the world at that time will not really have any position at all. They will not maybe even be in existence. That is a time, yes, when spirituality and heeding the Torah will be a genuine possibility. But what's that got to do with now? If, however, we are able to project and be inspired by our ultimate destiny, our ultimate spiritual destiny, and bring that to bear here now, then yes, there is a chance for us. That, first of all, was what the Midbar represented. The 40 years in the Midbar represented a microcosm of a projection of what the world to come will be. Within this world, there is a place where there are no nations, where there is no other cultural or spiritual impediments to completely keeping the Torah as they should be. However, you're going to ask, there is an intervening time. There is the time between emerging from the womb, our spiritual womb, these 40 years, and the time when Mashiach comes. We're going to have to deal with that. And then we're culturally not fortified. How can we deal with that? What are we going to do with this cultural shock? And the answer is, depends, to what extent are we able to project the future? This future, when Mashiach, when everything will be spiritual. And this is perhaps the idea again of the Ovos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, in my view of things, Hashem takes a view, a priori view from the beginning. I see Klal Yisrael. There's a reason why I view this dynamic. The Klal Yisrael starts from the Ovos. But in actual fact, it's not just starting from the Ovos. Hashem says, I project. I say, when I see Avraham, I actually see a whole nation. Because Hashem says, I promise that's what's going to be. And going with that dynamic, in actual fact, Hashem, so to speak, is projecting the future. The spiritual future, the spiritual hope for an enlightened and potent spiritual future. And Hashem says, when I see Avraham, I see Klal Yisrael through all the generations. I actually see them at the end of days, when yes, they will thrive, and when there will be no Yetzer Hara, there will be nothing at all whatsoever. And the Ovos represent, like we said, is a projection of that. It's an anticipation of that. Is projected onto the Ovos, coming through to Klal Yisrael, and finalizing itself in the Yemais HaMashiach. That is why, essentially, we are able to maintain. That's why that's this power that Klal Yisrael have to maintain the spiritual fortification, the spiritual isolation, even when confronted with the cultural onslaught that the world has to bring. Because Hashem has given us, has divinely imputed within us, this projection, this ability to anticipate the future. This dynamic that even from the Ovos, from the beginning, Hashem says, I am already really viewing the Ovos in the lens of everything that will emanate from the Ovos. I already see the future and the past put together as one continuum. As we're told, Einstein tells us that. Yeah, it's all moving within one continuum. We're moving through space and time at the speed of light, which means actually we can anticipate the end already exists now. And therefore, this spiritual dimension already exists now. And that is what Bilam is saying. Therefore, the Am Levodod Yishkoin, we can take that inspiration and take that forward. And therefore, we do not necessarily have to expose ourselves to all foreign culture in order to be able to deal with it. No, we can maintain our spiritual womb, our spiritual isolation, because that is in true fact, anything else, any other cultural distractions are themselves purely transient. They do not represent what truly is waiting for the world to happen. And since they're transient, we don't have to be bothered by them, we don't have to engage them, and they do not necessarily have any impact upon us whatsoever. And this is why Hashem is able also to view perhaps this procreation of Klal Yisrael in a spiritual manner. Because even though it looks on the outside like a physical base act and perhaps gives grounds to say Yisrael also are engaging in the baser parts of the world, but since again it's done in anticipation, we're viewing it as an anticipatory. It's going to give birth to the tzaddikim, it's going to give birth to the generation that's going to be living in the times of Mashiach, and at that time everything is going to be spiritual. Even the act of procreation is going to be a completely purely spiritual act. It's really a means of bringing more tzaddikim into the world. In which case, Klal Yisrael, given this dynamic, are able to, so to speak, we can project that even now. Even the most basic functions that Klal Yisrael engage in themselves have this pure spiritual dimension to them. And therefore, Bilam is unable to even thwart them and attack them, even with resort to that aspect of them. And this perhaps also is what Bilam said. Bilam says, if I die by the sword, I will not have a portion in the world to come. We ask, what is this saying? So perhaps it's cogent. We're going to mention this in Hashem. In the third set of Brochos, the Targum Yerushalmi brings that, and I think it's in the second as well. Bilam described how his prophetic inspiration actually came about. It says, Noifel ugluyi noim. He used to fall down on his face, and that was when the secrets of prophecy were revealed to him. Secrets that the Talmud, the Yushalm, the Midrashim say, and the Targum here says, that were not revealed even to the prophets of Israel. That was the higher spiritual heights to which Bilam was able to achieve. When he would fall on his face, Kasherotzo, He will see the visage of Hashem himself. He falls down, and his eyes are revealed. It's revealed to him. He sees what no other man sees. When he wanted it to be revealed to him, he would prostrate himself on the floor, and these secrets would be revealed to him that were even hidden from the Nevi'im. So why is this dynamic, this falling on the floor? Why does this help it to be revealed to him? So you could suggest, let's use the Yerushalmi. That's the Targum Yonison. Targum Yerushalmi adds, Hoya misnabe al nafshe do nofil becharba. He's going to fall by the sword. V'soif hanevuah liskayim. V'soif nevuah liskayim. Why is Bilam mentioning this now? He mentions this in the introduction to subsequent prophecies, that he sees the divine will, he sees the divine chambers, what's happening. He's given a permission to perceive what is happening. He falls down, and there things are revealed to him. And he sighs, what's this noifil? He actually will fall by the sword. He'll be killed by the sword, and soif nevuah liskayim, and this nevuah will actually, this prophecy that he will fall by the sword, it seems, will certainly be enacted, will certainly come to pass. So what's it saying? So it could be saying like this. Essentially, within a material physical world, there's no possibility of prophecy. There's no reasonable possibility of prophecy. A person has to sort of transcend the material dimension. And Bilam, in order to achieve his unique level of prophecy, to see what even the prophets themselves were unable to appraise, how was he able to do that? He had, so to speak, in some form, to rise above, to transcend materialism on an even greater level. And perhaps the way he was able to do that was noifil. His nefila was symbolic perhaps of his death, of his passage into another world. And that's perhaps why he invokes, you know what, I'm going to be passing into another world, and it's, so to speak, it's a definite. This nevuah is going to be niskayim, I'm going to be falling by the sword, which means it's not going to be a disintegration, a gradual process is going to happen in the future. No, it's really the sword is hanging over his head, and it could be any second now. And therefore, says Bilam, in some ways I can fall down, I can again project, I can anticipate that I'm going to be moving into a spiritual world. In that spiritual world, I see things that people in this world are unable to perceive. That's what Bilam is anticipating. I am able, therefore, to gain a view, perhaps, of the future world. So this is partly what Bilam is saying. If I will die, but he adds, if I will die by the sword, then this tells me I'm not coming to the world to come. And perhaps it's saying like this. His dying by the sword is going to be his ultimate fate. And that is, so to speak, when Hashem's, that represents perhaps this epoch, when all material, the material essence of the world is no longer what is dominant, and the spiritual aspect of Hashem's holy presence being revealed to the world is what is dominant in the world. At that time, says Bilam, what is going to be my fate? Am I just going to sort of expire, or am I going to be killed by the sword? And what's that saying? So you could say this is saying like this. Essentially, we can ask really now what's going on now. We're going to actually be confronting now. Essentially, the argument between Bilam, the cultural argument, the spiritual argument between Bilam and Bolok representing on one half and representing the nations of the world, and Klal Yisrael on the other half. And we said it's a fight for the cultural identity, spiritual identity of the world. Who is spiritually dominant? Who has the final say in this world? Klal Yisrael, the Torah, Hashem's commandments, or no, a world of culture and enjoyment and of business, etc. The world running itself in science, exploration, man and his great endeavors, great achievements. Is that who is the cultural leader in this world? And Hashem is showing Bilam through this, no, ultimately Klal Yisrael is the one that will survive and thrive, and that is also, in actual fact, the way things are now. You cannot, in actual fact, ignore the spiritual message that Klal Yisrael brings even in this world. As anticipated in the next world, and Klal Yisrael is anticipating it, and it's a reality now. That's what this is all saying. This is a reality now, and therefore we are bound by it. But within that, there is also room to question, to what extent is it reality? To what extent is it now incumbent upon the world to adopt the Torah, to adopt Yisrael, to adopt the ways of Hashem as expressed in the Torah? Or to what extent are they allowed to ignore it? Is the pshat that Klal Yisrael is stronger? There's a battle between forces, but Klal Yisrael sort of is perhaps the more dominant force that will ultimately triumph. Or no? Is it stronger than that? Is essentially Klal Yisrael a force that overwhelmingly overwhelms and defeats and sort of knocks out any other spiritual force that seeks to assert itself in any way? And that, you could say, is a b'china of cherev. That is a type, in actual fact, Klal Yisrael, the spiritual message of Klal Yisrael is not just a spiritual message. It's such a potent spiritual message. Hashem's presence is meant to be, and the nations of the world sort of blots it out, but essentially it is such a potent force. Essentially it's like a sword. Essentially it's cutting. It is overpowering through armed conflict any other spiritual counter force that seeks to, in some ways, to limit the sphere of influence of Hashem's spiritual message. And we're saying, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, essentially, no, it is almost like a sword that bites. That's why the Malach appeared to Bilam. The angel appeared with a sword in his hand, saying the spiritual message of Yisrael is so potent, it's actually like a sword that sort of cuts up and can destroy everything else. In one foul swoop, Hashem sort of allows it to occur, allows the world to take a natural course, but that is, in actual fact, an apparition. That is not a true representation of reality. In reality, is a sword hanging over you every second that can annihilate you. Maybe that's the corona, that's partly what it's doing. But it's more strong than that. It's like a spiritual atom bomb that will wipe out everything. And that's what Bilam says. If there are two sides to the argument, then I can almost still take sort of refuge in our world, in our material cultural world, and therefore I can still perhaps even merit I've not lost my place in the world to come. I've not defied actively HaKadosh Baruch Hu, therefore I have promise in the world to come. But if essentially my downfall will be through the sword, the projection of the world to come, so to speak, will be felt as a sword that will completely knock us out. Says Bilam, in that case I have no hope. Because that represents what is going to happen in the world to come. That the overwhelming spiritual revelation will be like a sword that cuts out anything, that gives no hope to anything whatsoever, annihilates any other spiritual aversion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we're saying, Bilam says, so to speak, as whole speech is, that this world is already a projection, an anticipation of that spiritual world. In which case, it's a sword in this world that sort of is knocking out everything. And if I seek to promote a counterculture to Hashem, then I am defying actively the sword. Therefore, I have no entitlement whatsoever to the world to come. This is an act of defiance, which I am not entitled to make. Olam haba, so to speak, is staring me in the face, and I am saying, no, I do not want a portion in that. I have defined it, therefore I know I will have no portion in the world to come. This maybe, we can therefore perhaps use this, just to understand the last thing, l'cho, this dialogue between Bilam and Bolok, where they say, what's Bilam's lashon? So, you know what? Why should you? So I'll set it up, and then we'll come back to Tzemir Hashem. And so perhaps we can say that this is part of the exchange between Bilam and Bolok. Bolok says to Bilam, after Bilam had refused to come, and ultimately Bilam turns up, and Bolok says to him, Halei sholech shalachti, I sent for you to come. Lama lo yolachto ilai. Lama lo yolachto. And Bilam answers, Hini bosi elecho. Say, I've come to you. But hayochel uchal, I'm not going to be able to say anything. And this is part of the dialogue. That Bolok is trying to assure Bilam that essentially, like we said, the world is given over to man. Hashem is not a force here, and therefore you will be able to curse Am Yisrael. And you don't have to worry about yourself as well. You're going to say Klal Yisrael are the dominant spiritual force in this world. But even Klal Yisrael have got the weak spots, says Bolok. The whole time he says, could even be, this expression of lecha is the one that's used. Where do you find lecha? By B'nais Loit. Like they say, and there when they did this act of incestuousness, Lot and his daughters, they said, L'cho nashkes avinu. Paul says by Hashem when he's taking out from Mitzrayim. But I think Bolok is perhaps saying, Klal Yisrael also, somewhere in the family, go back to Terach, you get to Lot, there's also impurity there. If you can inspire them to follow this lead, you can say Klal Yisrael also is associated with this, then you have a chance. Sholech Shalachtim, maybe he's also invoking also the chet of the Meraglim. Also Shalach Lecho. Klal Yisrael are spiritually susceptible, spiritually vulnerable. And Bilam answers, Ini bosi elecho, but I am not able to say anything. I am powerless because essentially Hashem is master of the world and Klal Yisrael, his chosen people, and I don't think they will essentially be sinners. As evidenced by Hine bosi. Where is Hine bosi elecho? Hashem gave them the Torah. Hine onoichi bo elecho, Hashem says by Matan Torah. Hine onoichi bo elecho. It's not lecho, forget the lecho. That's not part of them, because they've come out of Mitzrayim and they've received the Torah. Hashem himself comes to them. That represents a new, Hashem has given them the spiritual fortification that defines Klal Yisrael essentially as an Am of Tzaddikim, a Mamlechas Kohanim, and therefore, says Bilam, I'm not optimistic that we're able essentially to do anything against Klal Yisrael. Okay, we have to attend to some mundane matters ourselves. So Mitzvah will carry on soon.